aspirations are rising all over the world. A friend of mine, Rob Nail, who is a visionary leader of a group called the Singularity University, says before he starts his talks, "Today is the slowest day of innovation you will ever experience again for the rest of your lives." And so one of the things that's happening, and in his prediction, is that between 2022 and 2025, so let's say in 2025, in 7 short years, the expectation is that all 8 billion people on the face of the earth will have access to broadband, not just the internet, but broadband, and of course have access to smartphones. The number of smartphones in Africa is going to triple over the next few years. From 2015 to 2020, the number of smartphones will go from about 200 million to over 600 million. And so as people get access to the internet, and as they have access to smartphones, we actually know what happens. We've studied this phenomenon. What happens is at first they're very happy. Their satisfaction with life goes up when they get access to the internet. But the other thing that happens, and this is measurable, is that their reference income goes up. The income to which they compare their own goes up. Their reference income is no longer their neighbors, but the reference income becomes much more correlated to what they're watching on their smartphones. Now, as somebody who's grown up in, who was born in South Korea when it was one of the poorest countries in the world. South Korea in the 1950s, when I was born, had a lower GDP per capita than Somalia, than Ghana, than many African countries. Now, of course, it's done very well, and my parents were very fortunate in that they were able to help us live out our own aspirations. What's happening is that all 8 billion people will have similar aspirations. There's a convergence of aspirations. And so if you think about the young people who may have not been adequately nourished, who may have not had the kind of education that we would like to provide to everyone, and one of our most recent World Development Reports suggests that there is a huge difference in the quality of schooling in the world. And so a year of education in Singapore is about the same as 2 years of education in many countries, including Yemen, Malawi, and many African countries. A study that we did with a Swedish group showed that in 6 countries in Eastern Africa, when we did testing of elementary school teachers, we found that only 1/3 of the teachers could pass the 2nd grade competency exam. So what we're going to have very soon is lots of people with high aspirations who are not prepared to compete in the digital economy, but whose aspirations could lead to, we fear, lots of frustration, which in turn could lead to more fragility, conflict, violence, extremism, and then, of course, eventually migration. In terms of technology, on the one hand, I work with President Kagame, and he has installed 4G LTE in the entire country of Rwanda, and that's allowed him to do something that no country in the world, including developed countries, have ever done, which is to use drones that are piloted purely by artificial intelligence. And again, the reason he can do that is because there's 4G LTE coverage around the entire country, and so as the drones move, they are connected every second. And so what he's done is he has used drones to deliver blood. And it's the first time in history that that kind of technology has been used to provide social services in this way. This is extremely important. But the other side of technology, of course, is that jobs are going away. 65% of primary school children today will be doing jobs that don't exist today. McKinsey Institute suggests that 50% of all currently existing jobs will be eliminated. Now, how are we doing in terms of the preparation of developing countries, and specifically, how are we doing in the Sahel in terms of preparation for competing in what will certainly be a more digitally demanding economy in the future? One of the things that we're very worried about is the very high levels of childhood stunting. And to put it very briefly, a stunted child is a child who is two standard deviations below the normal height for age. And we've done study after study that showed that all children can grow the same amount in the first year and the second year. And so when a child is stunted, we know that they can have as much as 40% less brain mass. And we know that the number of neuronal connections the child has in his or her head are far fewer than the non-stunted children. So the average rate of childhood stunting in the Sahel is 35%. So what will happen if more than a third of your future adults will be unable to compete in the economy of the future? We believe that this is tantamount to a human capital crisis. 250 million children in the world can't read or write. 264 million children in the world aren't enrolled in primary or secondary school. Future stability and security, I would argue, the very fabric of functioning societies, depends on how well we're able to support countries in the Sahel, but countries throughout the developing world, to build the most important infrastructure, the one form of infrastructure that we know for sure will be useful in whatever economy the future brings, and that's gray matter infrastructure, the infrastructure of children's brains and their ability to read. This year we've launched the Human Capital Project, and what we're going to do is produce a ranking. Now, rankings are always very, very controversial. But we have now done research which shows us that because we have so much better data on health outcomes and education outcomes, if you look at health outcomes, not expenditure, but outcomes, if you take health outcomes and educational outcomes and then look backward and ask the question, have changing health and education outcomes been correlated with economic growth? We found in our first analysis that of the top 25% of countries that have improved their human capital the most over the past 25 years, and you compare them to the bottom 25%, the difference in economic growth was 1.25% of GDP per year for 25 years, among the most strongly correlated factors in determining economic growth. So the ranking is simply our effort to reveal to leaders in the world, especially ministers of finance, who I work with every day, especially ministers of finance, that if you want to grow your economy, especially in the future, when you don't know what path of economic development will be open, but you know that you'll need bright, healthy workers able to learn, then you need to invest more in getting the kind of outcomes that you really want.